Billionaire's card declined. Then a little black girl did the unthinkable. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's begin. The coffee shop was busy, with people chatting, sipping their lattes, and tapping away on their laptops. The soft hum of the espresso machine blended with the faint chatter of customers. Everything seemed normal until a sudden tension cut through the air. At the front counter, a well-dressed man, mid-40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and designer suit, slid his card across the counter to pay for his coffee. The cashier swiped it, and, with a click, her face shifted to confusion. She swiped it again. The card was declined. "I'm sorry, sir, but your card was declined," she said, her voice a little shaky. The man's smile faltered, and a red flush crept up his neck. He tried again, swiping the card multiple times, but it was no use. The line behind him was growing, and people began whispering. Some glanced at their phones, waiting impatiently, while others exchanged awkward glances. But the man remained calm, keeping his composure as if he were used to this sort of thing. "Can you try it again?" he asked, though there was a slight edge to his voice now. The cashier nodded but seemed just as nervous as before. The tension in the room was palpable, and just as it seemed the situation would spiral into something even more uncomfortable, a small voice broke through the air. "Excuse me, sir," a little black girl said, standing near the door. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her clothes slightly worn and her face framed by thick braids. She was holding a crumpled dollar bill in one hand, and with the other, she was holding the doorframe, nervously glancing at the man. "Here," she said, her voice quiet but determined. "I can help." The man turned toward her, raising an eyebrow, surprised that a child was stepping in to help him. The room fell silent, the whispers dying down as the people in line waited to see what would happen next. The girl stepped forward and pulled out a small, slightly torn card from her pocket, handing it to the cashier. "This will work," she said with a nod, as though she were completely confident in her action. The cashier hesitated, looking back and forth between the little girl and the man. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. But the girl nodded firmly, her tiny hand still extended toward the cashier. The man looked at the card for a moment, then back at the girl. "What is this?" he asked, confusion and curiosity blending in his tone. The girl simply smiled and said, "My grandma always says you help people when they need it most. I think you need help now." With that, the cashier swiped the card. This time, there was no error. The payment went through, and the man's eyes widened in surprise. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer than before. He looked at the girl, who had now turned to leave. "I don't know what to say," he muttered under his breath. The little girl simply smiled and waved as she exited the shop, the door shutting behind her with a soft chime. The man stood there, staring at the card in his hand, still trying to process what had just happened. It was a small moment, but one that had changed everything. The chaos in the room had suddenly quieted, leaving behind an air of confusion and something else, something deeper. The man stood still, staring at the small, worn card in his hand. His mind was racing, but the noise in the cafe had quieted down, and he was left alone in the stillness of the moment. The young girl who had stepped in to help him was already gone, slipping out of the cafe with a quiet grace that seemed out of place in the chaos she had just caused. He was still trying to understand what had just happened. Was this a coincidence? How could a child, with so little, have known exactly what he needed at that moment? His hand tightened around the card, and he realized the power of her gesture had already begun to shift something deep inside him. He paid for his coffee and walked out into the cold afternoon air. The world seemed to be moving at a faster pace now. The hum of the city felt louder, and everything seemed more vivid. He walked down the street, hands in his pockets, replaying the encounter in his mind. His thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of his phone. He took it out and saw his assistant's name flashing on the screen. "Mr. Caldwell, the meeting with the board is about to start. We need to get moving." He sighed, reluctant to pull himself away from the thoughts of the girl, but he knew he had to. The meeting was crucial. Yet, something about her kept tugging at his thoughts. The voice of the girl, her small but confident gesture, lingered in his mind as he entered the black SUV parked outside. He could feel his focus drifting from the agenda of the day as the car sped toward the conference building. A few hours later, after a day full of financial reports and heated discussions, Mr. Caldwell found himself walking through the bustling city streets again, but this time with a different feeling inside. It wasn't the usual confidence, the usual sense of control. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just his card being declined earlier in the day. He had felt vulnerable, something he hadn't experienced in years. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that vulnerability wasn't something he could ignore. As he walked past a park, he saw a familiar figure standing at the gates, a little black girl, no older than 8, holding something in her hand. He stopped in his tracks. Was it her? The girl who had helped him? She was standing there, looking around, as if waiting for something. Or someone. Without thinking, he crossed the street and approached her. She looked up as he got closer. You? He started, but the words caught in his throat. She smiled, a small but knowing smile, and held up her hand, a crumpled piece of paper in it. I've been waiting for you, she said, her voice soft yet steady. He blinked, a little taken aback. Why? I don't understand, he stammered, his voice trailing off. She simply handed him the paper. It was a note, scrawled in hurried handwriting. Thank you for believing in me, it read. I know you'll do the right thing. He paused, looking down at the note. In confusion, then back up at her. What do you mean? I don't even know your name, he said, his mind racing. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced around, as if ensuring no one was watching them. My name is Maya, she said, after a moment. My grandma told me that sometimes, the people who need help the most are the ones who don't know they need it. The words struck him like a lightning bolt. He looked at her, taking in the simplicity of her words. And what do you need from me? He asked, a sense of realization beginning to dawn on him. She looked at him with calm eyes and nodded toward the note he still held in his hands. I don't need anything, she replied, her voice carrying an air of finality. You already helped. 1,000 questions ran through his mind, but before he could ask another, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. He stood there for a moment, the words echoing in his mind. You already helped. It hit him harder than he had expected. It wasn't the money or the gesture that had mattered. It was the act of kindness, the human connection that had made all the difference. Maya's simplicity had cut through the noise of his carefully curated world, leaving him questioning his priorities. As he walked back to his office later that evening, the events of the day weighed heavily on him. He couldn't shake the image of Maya, standing there with the note, her quiet strength cutting through the chaos of his day. And just like that, he realized that something had changed in him. He wasn't sure yet what it meant, but he knew one thing for certain. He would never forget the little girl who had shown him that even in a world of power, wealth, and success, the smallest gestures could make the biggest impact. The next few days passed by in a blur, but one thing stayed with Mr. Caldwell, the memory of Maya. The moment she handed him the crumpled card, the quiet strength in her voice, it all kept resurfacing in his mind. He found himself waking up early, staring out of his office window, lost in thought. Maya had done something to him, something subtle but undeniable. It wasn't the fact that she had helped him with the payment. It wasn't the card, or even the money. It was the gesture, her belief in kindness, in doing the right thing despite the odds. It gnawed at him in a way that felt both uncomfortable and right. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he truly knew about the world outside his own. He had been so caught up in his empire, in numbers, deals, and stock prices, that he had forgotten what it was like to truly see people. To see them beyond their titles, their roles, their social standing. He remembered that she had said her grandmother taught her to help those in need, even when it wasn't easy. Her words kept coming back to him. Sometimes, the people who need help the most are the ones who don't know they need it. He had helped Maya once, but in doing so, it felt like she had helped him more than he could have imagined. The next weekend, unable to shake the thought of her, he decided to find her. He didn't know why. Maybe it was a sense of obligation, maybe it was curiosity, but he had to see her again. He had to understand why she had such an impact on him. He went to the neighborhood where she had disappeared after their brief encounter, but it wasn't easy. The streets were unfamiliar, filled with buildings that looked run down and streets that felt more like forgotten corners of the city. He parked his car, stepped out, and walked down the cracked sidewalk. The air was heavy, a mix of city dust and the faint scent of street food. People were hustling along, their lives moving at their usual pace. It was different from his world, a world that felt so isolated now, so distant from what really mattered. After asking a few people around, he finally found out where Maya lived. It wasn't a place he had expected to find, but then again, he didn't know what he was expecting. She lived in an old apartment building near a busy intersection, its windows cracked, and the door to the building was barely hanging on its hinges. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should really be here. But then he thought of her again, the way she had helped him, her quiet bravery, and he knew he had to go inside. He knocked on the door, unsure of what to say. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing Maya's grandmother. She was an older woman, with a tired face but eyes that still held a spark of life in them. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious but polite. "I'm looking for Maya," Mr. Caldwell said, his voice steady but with an edge of nervousness. The woman eyed him for a moment, her gaze steady, before stepping aside. "She's inside," she said quietly. Mr. Caldwell stepped into the small apartment, and as he did, he immediately felt the weight of the space. It wasn't much. There was a small couch, a table with a few mismatched chairs, and a couple of old pictures on the walls. It was simple, but there was a warmth to it. Maya was sitting at the table, drawing something, her concentration intense. When she saw him, her face lit up, but she didn't say anything right away. Instead, she looked down at her drawing, hesitant. Mr. Caldwell wasn't sure what to say either, so he just stood there for a moment. Finally, Maya spoke. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. "I wanted to thank you," he said, walking over to her. "You helped me that day, and I realized something." Maya looked up at him, her small eyes filled with a wisdom beyond her years. "You helped me too," she said quietly. "I told you. Grandma always says that when you help someone, you might not know it, but you're helping yourself, too." Mr. Caldwell was taken aback by her words. It felt like she was teaching him something he had been missing for so long. He looked at her drawing. "What are you drawing?" he asked, changing the subject. Maya held up the piece of paper, revealing a simple sketch of a tree. It was rough, but there was something beautiful about it. "It's a tree," she said, smiling. "Grandma told me to draw something that makes me feel safe." Mr. Caldwell looked at the tree, then at Maya's grandmother, who was standing by the door, watching them both. "You've taught her well," he said quietly, his voice filled with respect. The woman smiled, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "She's taught me more than I've taught her," she replied. Mr. Caldwell's heart tightened at her words. He had come here expecting to thank Maya, but it was her grandmother who had given him something far more valuable, a glimpse into a world he had been blind to for so long. He took a deep breath and made a decision. "I want to help," he said, looking at both of them. "I'm not sure how yet, but I want to make sure you don't have to worry about anything anymore. You don't deserve this." Maya's grandmother looked at him, her expression softening. "You don't have to do that," she said gently. "But thank you." Mr. Caldwell smiled, but there was a seriousness behind it now. "I want to." He turned to Maya, who was still holding the drawing. "And you, Maya? You've taught me more about kindness and strength than anyone I know." Maya's smile was small, but full of pride. "I told you, you just have to help." Mr. Caldwell stood in the small apartment, still processing the decision he had made moments ago. The words had come out without thinking, but now that they were said, he felt a wave of responsibility wash over him. He wasn't just talking about offering money or charity. He was talking about something deeper. He was talking about changing lives. Maya looked at him with those wise eyes, and he could see the quiet strength she carried. But it wasn't just her. It was her grandmother, too. The woman who had raised Maya with values of dignity and respect, even in the face of their hardships. Mr. Caldwell knew he couldn't just walk away from this. He had been given a chance to do something meaningful. The days that followed were a blur of meetings and decisions, but the thought of Maya and her grandmother stayed with him. Every time he went back to his office, it felt emptier than before. The usual financial reports, stock prices, and business deals no longer held the same weight. His mind kept drifting back to the small apartment, the sketch of the tree, and the promise he had made. Maya's simple, Yet profound belief in helping others had opened his eyes. He knew he had to follow through. A week later, after a lot of back and forth with his team, Mr. Caldwell called Maya's grandmother. He explained his plan, his intention to help them both, not just with money, but with something that would give them a chance to build a future. There was silence on the other end of the line. "You don't have to do this," the woman said quietly. "We've managed. Maya and I have always made do." He paused, feeling a rush of emotion. "I know, but you shouldn't have to. You should have a chance to breathe, to live without fear of tomorrow. No one should have to live like this, not when I can do something about it." Another silence followed. He held his breath, waiting for her response. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "I appreciate your offer, Mr. Caldwell, and I'll accept it, but only if you promise me one thing." "Anything," he replied, his heart racing. "That you won't just see us as a project," she said. "We're not charity cases. We're people. Promise me that." He exhaled, feeling the weight of her words. "I promise," he said sincerely. "This is about dignity, not charity. I just want to help." Over the next few weeks, things began to change. Maya and her grandmother moved into a new apartment, one far from the noise and danger of the streets they had lived on for so long. It was small, but clean and safe, with enough space for them to finally feel like they could breathe. Mr. Caldwell helped with the transition, offering to cover the moving expenses and anything they needed to get settled. Maya's grandmother was hesitant at first, not accustomed to such generosity, but as time went on, she saw the sincerity in Mr. Caldwell's actions. Maya, too, slowly began to open up to the idea of this new life. She still held on to her grandmother's values of independence and hard work, but now she was also beginning to trust that people could help without expecting anything in return. One afternoon, a few weeks after their move, Mr. Caldwell visited their new apartment. He wanted to see how they were doing, to check in. When he arrived, Maya greeted him at the door, her smile wide and warm. "Hey," she said, "I've been waiting for you." She looked more at ease now, more like a kid than the serious girl he had first met. She took him inside, and as he stepped into the living room, he noticed how different it was. The space was cozy, with a small couch, a bookshelf filled with books, and a few framed pictures on the walls. It felt like a home. Maya's grandmother was in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. She turned when she heard Mr. Caldwell's footsteps and gave him a warm smile. "We're doing well," she said. "It's not perfect, but it's ours." Mr. Caldwell nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. This was the kind of change he had hoped for. This wasn't about fixing everything with money. It was about giving them a chance, a real opportunity to build something for themselves. As they sat down for tea, Mr. Caldwell asked Maya about her life. "How's school going?" he asked, genuinely curious. Maya shrugged but smiled. "It's good. It's different, though. People are nicer here." Her voice held a trace of surprise, as if she still wasn't used to the kindness she had received. "That's because you're different," Mr. Caldwell said with a chuckle. "You see the best in people, Maya. You're teaching the rest of us to do the same." She blushed at the compliment, but didn't shy away from it. "Grandma says that's what you should do," Maya said. "You help when you can, and you don't expect anything in return." Mr. Caldwell smiled, touched by her words. "Your grandmother is a very wise woman." Later that evening, after he left their apartment, Mr. Caldwell couldn't stop thinking about what Maya had said. You help when you can, and you don't expect anything in return. It was such a simple sentiment, but one that he had overlooked for so long. In his world, everything had a price, and every favor had a condition. But Maya and her grandmother had shown him that true kindness had no strings attached. As he walked back to his car, he knew that he had been changed. It wasn't just the money he had given them. It was the lesson they had given him. A lesson about helping others without expecting anything in return. About finding value in people not by what they can do for you, but by who they are. And in that moment, he knew he would carry this lesson with him for the rest of his life. Weeks passed, and the changes that Mr. Caldwell had set in motion were slowly taking shape. Maya and her grandmother had settled into their new home, and while the apartment was modest, it was filled with warmth and a sense of stability that neither had felt before. Maya had started school again, and her teachers noticed a difference in her. She was quieter, but there was a quiet confidence in her demeanor now, something that hadn't been there before. She didn't speak much at school, but she didn't need to. She had learned to navigate the world in her own way, without needing to stand out, but with a sense of pride that had been cultivated in her by her grandmother's teachings. She began making friends, small groups of children who would sit with her during lunch or partner with her during classroom projects. For the first time in a long while, Maya felt like she belonged. Meanwhile, Mr. Caldwell found himself drawn back to their world more and more. He would visit their apartment regularly, bringing groceries or a few books for Maya, asking how things were going, always listening, always offering support, but never pushing too hard. He wanted to give them space, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more he could do. One afternoon, as he sat with Maya and her grandmother over tea, he asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "How have you been, really?" he asked, looking from Maya to her grandmother. Maya's grandmother took a deep breath, setting down her cup. "We're doing better," she said, her voice full of quiet strength. "It's not perfect, but we're learning to live without fear, without worrying about where the next meal will come from. It's been a long time since we've had that kind of peace." Mr. Caldwell nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. He had been unsure if he was doing enough, but hearing those words, seeing the subtle changes in their lives, told him he had made a difference. But as Maya's grandmother spoke, something else crossed Mr. Caldwell's mind, something he hadn't considered. "There's something I wanted to ask," he said, his voice tentative. "You've been kind enough to accept my help, but I want to know more. What do you both want for the future?" Maya's grandmother looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. "I want Maya to have the chance to be a child," she said slowly. "To not have to worry about survival, to be able to learn, to grow, to have a future where she can make her own choices. That's all I want for her." Mr. Caldwell felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. For the first time in his life, he realized just how much privilege he had taken for granted. Maya's grandmother had spent her whole life fighting to provide for her granddaughter, never asking for help, never expecting anything in return. And yet here she was, offering him her trust, letting him be part of their journey. Maya, too, had learned to survive, to navigate the world with quiet strength. And yet, she had never once asked for anything for herself. She had simply done what she could, giving what little she had to help others. He knew now that he couldn't just stand by and offer temporary assistance. He had to help them build a future that was theirs, a future that gave Maya the freedom to dream. "I'll do everything I can to make sure that happens," Mr. Caldwell said, his voice steady. "I won't let you down. Maya deserves every chance at a better life, and I'll make sure she has it." That evening, Mr. Caldwell walked back to his car, but his thoughts were no longer on business deals or financial reports. He had been given a glimpse into a world he had never fully understood before, and it had changed him. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a person with the power to change lives, and that responsibility weighed heavily on him. As he drove home, he couldn't stop thinking about Maya. He could see the quiet pride in her eyes, the strength in her small frame. She had already taught him so much about kindness, about resilience, about the power of doing what's right. He knew that with the right resources, Maya could do anything. He didn't want to be the one who gave her everything, but he wanted to be the one who helped her get there. When he arrived at his penthouse later that evening, he sat down at his desk and stared at the papers in front of him, the business decisions he had to make. But now, those papers felt meaningless. The real work, the work that mattered, was outside the boardroom. It was in Maya's eyes, in her grandmother's quiet strength. That was where the true impact would be made. As he picked up his phone and began to make calls, his mind was set on a new goal, to ensure that Maya had the future she deserved, a future that was full of possibilities, full of hope. And for the first time in his life, Mr. Caldwell felt like he was finally on the path to something that truly mattered. The weeks continued to unfold, and things seemed to fall into place for Maya and her grandmother. The new apartment was a world away from the cramped, cold spaces they had once lived in. It wasn't just the walls and the furniture that made it feel different. It was the feeling of security, of knowing that they didn't have to worry about tomorrow. Mr. Caldwell had kept his promise. He had made sure that their needs were met, not just with money but with resources that could help them build a future. Maya was enrolled in a new school, a place where she could learn, explore, and grow. She still kept to herself for the most part, but there was a quiet joy in her eyes now. Her teachers were impressed by her intelligence and her ability to focus, and though she didn't speak much, she wasn't invisible anymore. Maya had found her place in the world, even if it was still a little uncertain. One afternoon, as Mr. Caldwell was leaving the office, he received a call from Maya's grandmother. He immediately picked up, sensing the urgency in her voice. "Mr. Caldwell, we need to talk," she said. He felt a knot form in his stomach, not knowing what to expect. "What's wrong?" he asked, his mind racing. "It's Maya," she said, her voice shaking slightly. She's been having trouble at school. The other kids, they don't understand her." Mr. Caldwell's heart sank. He had known this might happen. Maya was different from the other kids in many ways, and while she was bright, she had always been more comfortable in her own world, away from the spotlight. "What happened?" he asked, already in motion. "The kids at school, they're making fun of her. They say she's strange. She's not fitting in. I think it's more than just bullying," her grandmother explained. She's becoming withdrawn." Mr. Caldwell stopped walking, his thoughts racing. He couldn't let this happen. Maya had been through too much to face this kind of rejection. He knew he had to do something. "I'll be there," he said, hanging up the phone. As he made his way to Maya's school, his mind was consumed by what he might find. He knew that he could offer financial security and opportunities, but what Maya needed now was something more. She needed to know that she wasn't alone, that she wasn't different in a way that made her unworthy. He arrived at the school and met with the principal, a kind woman who had already spoken to Maya's teachers about her difficulties fitting in. "We're doing everything we can," the principal said. "But it's clear that Maya needs more than just academic support. She needs emotional guidance, and she's not receiving it from her peers." Mr. Caldwell nodded, feeling a deep sense of responsibility. He knew that Maya was an extraordinary child, but he also knew that the world wasn't always kind to those who stood out. "What do you suggest?" he asked. "We're trying to bring in a counselor to help her process everything," the principal said. "But we also think it would help if she had someone to stand by her, someone who can remind her that she belongs here." Mr. Caldwell's mind went back to his promise, to make sure that Maya had the future she deserved, one where she didn't feel rejected or alone. As he walked out of the school building, he felt a new resolve within him. He knew what he had to do. Later that evening, Mr. Caldwell sat down with Maya and her grandmother. Maya was quiet, her eyes downcast. He could see the hurt in her eyes, the way she seemed to pull back from the world around her. "Maya," he said gently, "I know it's hard, but I want you to know something. You belong. You belong here, in this world, just as much as anyone else. And no matter what anyone says, I will always have your back." Maya looked up at him, her expression uncertain but hopeful. "But I don't fit in," she said quietly. "The other kids, they don't like me." Mr. Caldwell's heart ached as he looked at her. He could see how much she longed to be accepted, to be seen for who she was. "You don't need to fit in, Maya," he said, his voice firm but kind. "The world doesn't get to decide who you are. You get to decide that for yourself." Maya's grandmother nodded, her eyes filled with emotion. "We've always believed that," she said, her voice steady but filled with pride. "But sometimes, it's hard to remember, especially when others make you feel like you don't matter." Mr. Caldwell turned to Maya, his heart full of conviction. "You matter more than you know, Maya," he said. "You have so much to offer this world, and you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Not to the other kids at school, not to anyone." Maya's eyes filled with tears, but there was something different in them now, a sense of relief, of being understood. She didn't say anything, but she nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in. "I know this isn't easy," Mr. Caldwell continued, "but I want you to know that you're not alone. We'll figure this out together, okay?" Maya smiled, just a little, the first real smile he had seen in days. "Okay," she said, her voice small but full of determination. As he left their apartment that night, Mr. Caldwell felt a sense of pride in Maya that he hadn't expected. She was strong, stronger than he had even realized. And while she still had a long road ahead of her, he knew that she would find her place in this world. No matter what anyone else said, she would always belong. Weeks went by, and as Mr. Caldwell continued to support Maya and her grandmother, he began to see subtle but profound changes. Maya, while still quiet, was no longer retreating into herself as she had before. She was beginning to participate more at school, answering questions in class, even making a few friends. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, she was learning to find her place in the world, and the feeling of being different was slowly being replaced with a growing sense of confidence. It was a slow process, but it was progress. One afternoon, as Mr. Caldwell was walking back to his car after another long day of meetings, his phone rang. It was Maya's grandmother. Her voice on the other end was steady but urgent. "Mr. Caldwell, we need to talk." Maya's been asking about her father. His heart skipped a beat. He had always known that one day the subject of Maya's father would come up. He had been waiting for that moment, but he hadn't expected it to come so soon. He had tried to give Maya and her grandmother the space they needed, but deep down, he knew that Maya would eventually want answers. "What did she ask?" he replied, his voice tense. "She doesn't understand where he is, why he's not here," her grandmother explained. "I've tried to explain that he's not in the picture, but she keeps asking about him. I think she deserves to know the truth." Mr. Caldwell's mind raced. He had always known that Maya's father was a part of her life story, but it had never been something he'd felt ready to confront. Now, it seemed like the time had come, and he didn't know if he was prepared for what that truth might bring. "I'll come over tonight," Mr. Caldwell said, his voice firm despite the unease building inside him. "We'll talk to her together." When he arrived at their apartment later that evening, Maya was sitting on the couch, her eyes cast down at the floor. There was a quiet tension in the air, something unspoken, and he could tell that Maya had been waiting for him. "Hi, Maya," Mr. Caldwell said softly, sitting down next to her. "How are you doing?" She looked up at him, her expression serious. "I've been thinking about my dad," she said, her voice small but steady. "I don't remember him, but I keep wondering why he's not here. Why did he leave?" Mr. Caldwell swallowed hard. He had known this day would come, but hearing her ask the question made the weight of it all feel heavier. Maya was too young to understand the complexities of the situation, but she was old enough to know that there was a part of her life that was missing. He glanced at her grandmother, who nodded, signaling that it was time for him to speak. "Maya," he said gently, "sometimes things happen that we don't understand. Your dad, he wasn't able to be there for you. But that doesn't mean you're not important. You're loved, and you always will be." Maya's eyes were wide, searching his face for answers. "But why wasn't he there?" she asked again, a tear slipping down her cheek. Mr. Caldwell felt a lump form in his throat. He had known that Maya needed to hear the truth, but he hadn't expected it to be this difficult. "Your dad had his own problems," he said softly, "and he wasn't able to take care of you the way you deserved. But that doesn't mean you're not special, Maya. You have your grandma, and you have me now. We'll always be here for you." Maya wiped away her tear, but the sadness in her eyes remained. "But I want him to be here," she whispered. Mr. Caldwell nodded, understanding her pain. "I know, Maya. I know. But sometimes, the people we want the most aren't the ones who can give us what we need. And that's okay, because you are strong enough to make your own way. And you have a family here that loves you." There was a long pause, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Then, Maya spoke again. "Will you be my dad?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hit Mr. Caldwell like a wave crashing against the shore. He wasn't expecting it, but it made his heart swell. Maya wasn't asking for him to replace her father, but rather, she was asking for someone to take care of her, to give her the security and love she had always needed. He looked at her grandmother, who was silently watching the two of them, her eyes full of emotion. Mr. Caldwell took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. "Maya," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't replace your father, and I'm not trying to. But I can promise you this. I'll always be here for you. I'll be the one who shows up when you need someone. And I'll support you in every way I can. You're not alone, Maya. Not anymore." Maya looked at him, her eyes searching for the truth in his words. And when she found it, she smiled. A small, fragile smile, but one that spoke volumes. "Okay," she said softly. "Thank you." Mr. Caldwell smiled back, his heart full of a love he hadn't known he was capable of. "You're welcome, Maya. You're welcome." In that moment, everything shifted. Maya had asked him to be her father, not because she wanted him to fill a void, but because she needed someone she could trust, someone who would always be there. And in that moment, Mr. Caldwell realized that he had been given something far more valuable than money or status. He had been given a chance to be part of something real, something lasting, a chance to be a father, even if it wasn't in the traditional sense. As the night wore on, Mr. Caldwell stayed with Maya and her grandmother, talking about their plans for the future, sharing stories, and laughing together. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had a purpose beyond his business empire. Maya had shown him that sometimes, the most important things in life aren't about success or wealth. They're about the connections we make, the people we love, and the family we choose to create. Days turned into weeks, and as the months passed, Mr. Caldwell began to feel a growing connection with Maya and her grandmother. The promise he made to Maya, to always be there for her, had become something he no longer just said. It had become something he truly believed. Maya's grandmother, too, had begun to see the changes. Maya was thriving at school, and her confidence continued to grow. The transformation was subtle, but it was there. However, as things were starting to settle into what appeared to be a peaceful routine, an unexpected threat emerged. It began with a phone call. Mr. Caldwell was in his office, going over some papers, when his assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Caldwell, you have a visitor," she said, her tone hesitant. Mr. Caldwell frowned. "Who is it?" he asked. "I'm not sure, sir." "A lawyer," she replied. He rose from his chair, confused. A lawyer? He hadn't had any dealings with lawyers recently. He followed her down the hall, his thoughts running wild. As they entered the lobby, Mr. Caldwell saw a man standing by the reception desk. He was in his early 50s, dressed in a sharp suit that screamed professionalism. But there was something about his demeanor that felt off. "Mr. Caldwell," the man said, offering a stiff handshake. "I'm Kenneth Brooks. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Victor Thompson." The name hit Mr. Caldwell like a punch to the gut. Victor Thompson. He had known the name for years, but only in passing. He was a former business partner, a man who had once been part of Mr. Caldwell's empire. The two had parted ways amicably, or so Mr. Caldwell had believed. But now, standing before him, Brooks' presence was anything but comforting. "What can I do for you, Mr. Brooks?" Mr. Caldwell asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Brooks glanced around the room, as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "I represent Mr. Thompson's interests," he said, lowering his voice. "And I'm afraid you found yourself at the center of a situation that requires legal attention." Mr. Caldwell's mind raced. "What kind of situation?" he asked, his heart beginning to beat faster. "It seems there are some unresolved matters involving your recent dealings," Brooks continued, his words carefully measured. "And Mr. Thompson has made it clear that he intends to pursue them." Mr. Caldwell felt a wave of panic surge through him. He had never imagined that his past business dealings would come back to haunt him like this. "What exactly are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying that Mr. Thompson is not pleased with how things were handled. He's now pursuing legal action, and that could complicate the future for you and anyone associated with you." Mr. Caldwell stood frozen for a moment, his mind spinning. He had always believed he had done everything by the book, but now, the past was coming back to bite him. The thought of it affecting Maya and her grandmother made him feel sick to his stomach. "I'll need to look into this further," Mr. Caldwell said, his voice tight. "I don't know what you're referring to, but I'll make sure this is dealt with." Brooks nodded, but there was no sympathy in his eyes. "You'd better act quickly, Mr. Caldwell. This situation won't wait." With that, he turned and walked out of the lobby, leaving Mr. Caldwell standing there, his mind racing with questions he couldn't yet answer. As he stood in the silence of the office, he realized something that terrified him. This legal battle wasn't just about business. It was about protecting the future he had promised to Maya. He couldn't let his past mistakes affect her, not now, not when she had finally started to heal. He had to do whatever it took to keep her and her grandmother safe. That night, after he had gathered his thoughts and made a few calls, Mr. Caldwell found himself standing outside Maya's apartment building. His heart was heavy with the knowledge that his past was threatening to pull Maya back into the kind of instability she had fought so hard to escape. He knocked on the door, and when Maya's grandmother opened it, he could see the worry in her eyes. "Mr. Caldwell, what's wrong?" she asked, concern flooding her voice. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight. "There's something happening. Something I didn't expect." As he entered the apartment, he saw Maya sitting on the couch, her homework spread out in front of her. She looked up when he walked in, and for a moment, he saw the same quiet confidence in her eyes that he had seen before. But there was something different now, something that told him she knew more than she let on. "What's going on?" Maya asked, her voice surprisingly calm. Mr. Caldwell sat down next to her, looking at her and her grandmother. "There's a situation with my past business dealings," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "A man named Victor Thompson is trying to bring me down legally, and I don't want it to affect you too." Maya's grandmother looked at him with understanding, but there was no fear in her eyes, just the calm strength that had always been there. "We'll be okay," she said, her voice steady. "You've helped us already, Mr. Caldwell. You've given us a chance we never thought we'd have. We'll face this together." Mr. Caldwell took a deep breath, realizing just how much he had come to rely on their support. He had always thought he was the one who had to be strong, the one who had to protect them. But now, it was their strength that was giving him the courage to face what was coming. As the night wore on, they sat together, discussing their next steps, making plans, and finding strength in each other. Maya had taught him that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the people you chose to stand by, the people who believed in you when everything seemed impossible. And no matter what happened with Victor Thompson, he knew one thing for sure. He would stand by Maya and her grandmother, just as they had stood by him. And together, they would face whatever came next. The days after Mr. Caldwell's unsettling encounter with the lawyer, Kenneth Brooks, felt longer than usual. The threat from Victor Thompson loomed over him like a dark cloud, and despite his efforts to reassure Maya and her grandmother, the weight of the situation gnawed at him. But the truth was, he wasn't going to let anyone take away the new life they had built. He couldn't. The feeling of responsibility was heavier than anything he had ever experienced in his business career. It wasn't just about protecting his wealth or reputation anymore. It was about protecting Maya, her grandmother, and the future he promised them. That evening, as he sat in his office, trying to strategize and figure out how to fight back against Thompson's accusations, the phone rang. It was Maya's grandmother. "Mr. Caldwell, it's happening," she said, her voice tense. His heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "The letter," she said, her words almost a whisper. "We got it today, from the lawyer." Mr. Caldwell felt his stomach tighten. "I'll be right there," he said, hanging up the phone and grabbing his coat. As he made his way to their apartment, his mind raced. He had spent the past few days preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, the reality of the situation hit him full force. Maya had become the one thing he could never afford to lose. He couldn't let Thompson, or anyone, tear apart the life they had started to build. When he arrived at their apartment, he found Maya and her grandmother sitting at the table, the letter from Thompson's lawyer placed in front of them. Maya's eyes were wide, filled with a mix of confusion and fear. Her grandmother, as always, looked calm, but with an underlying tension that only Mr. Caldwell could sense. "We'll handle this," he said, walking toward them. He looked at Maya, giving her a reassuring smile. "This doesn't change anything. We're still in this together." But deep down, he knew that things were about to get much more complicated. He opened the letter and read through the legal jargon carefully. It was as bad as he feared. Victor Thompson was claiming that Mr. Caldwell had wrongfully taken assets from him during their previous business dealings. The letter threatened to go to court, and with it came the possibility of public exposure, tarnishing Mr. Caldwell's name and potentially undoing all the progress they had made with Maya and her grandmother. The battle ahead would be fierce, and he knew it would take everything he had to fight it. But there was no turning back now. "We'll need to consult with my lawyer," Mr. Caldwell said, looking at Maya's grandmother. "This is going to take time, but we'll figure it out. We won't let him win." Maya, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. "Why is he doing this?" Her voice trembled slightly, but there was a fierce determination behind her words. "What did you do to him, Mr. Caldwell?" Mr. Caldwell looked at her, his heart heavy. "I didn't do anything to him, Maya," he said softly. "Sometimes, people just want to take what isn't theirs. This is a fight that has nothing to do with you or your grandmother. It's between me and him, and I'll handle it." Maya looked down at the table, her small fingers tracing the edge of the letter. "But we've worked so hard to get here," she said quietly. "Why can't he just let us be happy?" Mr. Caldwell felt a lump form in his throat. The innocence in Maya's voice hit him harder than he expected. He had promised her a better life, a life free from fear, but now this battle was threatening to take that away. "I know, Maya," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I won't let him take that from you. You deserve better than this, and I'm going to make sure you get it." Maya's grandmother stood up, and walked over to him. "We don't need to hide anymore," she said, her voice firm. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Mr. Caldwell nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. He had made mistakes in the past, but in this moment, surrounded by Maya and her grandmother, he felt the strength of their bond. It wasn't just about money or power, it was about family, about loyalty. He could feel their trust in him, and it made him more determined than ever to fight. "You're right," he said, standing up. "Together. Always." The next day, Mr. Caldwell met with his lawyer to begin the process of fighting Thompson's claims. The legal team worked tirelessly, reviewing the documents and preparing a strategy. But even with all the resources at his disposal, Mr. Caldwell knew this wouldn't be easy. Thompson was a powerful man, with deep pockets, and he wasn't going to back down without a fight. For the first time in a long time, Mr. Caldwell felt vulnerable. He had always prided himself on being in control, but now, the stakes were higher than ever. He wasn't just fighting for his reputation or his wealth. He was fighting for Maya's future, for the life they had built together. He wouldn't let that be taken away. As the days went on, Maya and her grandmother continued to adjust to their new life, but the threat of the legal battle hung over them like a storm cloud. Despite their outward calm, Mr. Caldwell could sense the underlying tension. He knew that Maya still had questions about her father, about where she fit in the world, but now, there was something else, something bigger. He had promised her that he would always be there for her, no matter what. And now, he had to keep that promise. He couldn't let her face this fight alone. No matter what Thompson threw at them, Mr. Caldwell was determined to protect his family, to ensure that Maya had the future she deserved. And with that resolve, he knew that no matter how tough the road ahead was, they would face it together. The tension that had been hanging over Mr. Caldwell and his family for weeks began to feel even more intense as the legal battle with Victor Thompson escalated. Each day brought new complications, more legal jargon, and a deeper sense of urgency. The situation was moving faster than he had expected, and every decision felt like it could make or break the future he had promised Maya and her grandmother. Maya, ever perceptive, began to notice the shift in the air. She could see the way Mr. Caldwell looked at the documents scattered across the dining table, the lines on his face deepening as the stress mounted. She didn't ask many questions, but she knew something was wrong. It was clear to her that things were about to change, and she didn't want to face it alone. One evening, after a long day of meetings and phone calls, Mr. Caldwell returned to the apartment to find Maya sitting quietly in the living room, her homework forgotten on the coffee table. She looked up at him with those big, searching eyes, and for a moment, he felt like she could see right through him. "Mr. Caldwell," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with a quiet strength. "Is everything going to be okay?" Her question hit him harder than he expected. He had promised her that nothing would tear them apart. But now, the weight of the situation pressed down on him like never before. He knelt down beside her, meeting her gaze. "I don't know, Maya," he said honestly. "But what I do know is that no matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone in this." Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She nodded, a small, fragile smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I know. You've always kept your word." Mr. Caldwell's heart swelled with pride at her words. He wasn't sure if he was the one who needed comforting, but he couldn't show her that. "Not now. We'll get through this together," he promised, giving her a reassuring pat on the back before standing up. That night, as he lay in bed, Mr. Caldwell couldn't stop thinking about Maya's question. It had haunted him all day. He had told her she wasn't alone, that he was there for her, but the truth was, he wasn't sure if he could protect her from the storm that was coming. The next morning, as the sun rose over the city, Mr. Caldwell made a decision. He called his lawyer, determined to find a way out of this mess before it destroyed everything. They needed to find a solution quickly, or everything he had worked for, the life he had promised to Maya, could be lost. "I've been thinking about it," he said to his lawyer, his voice steady but urgent. "We need to take the fight to Thompson. We need to expose his lies and take control of this situation before he drags us through the mud." His lawyer was quiet for a moment, then replied, "You're right. We can't let him dictate the narrative. We need to hit back hard." The plan was simple, but it would take all of Mr. Caldwell's resources and power. They would gather evidence, use every legal avenue at their disposal, and make it clear to Thompson that he wasn't going to win this time. Mr. Caldwell was no longer just defending his wealth. He was fighting for the future of Maya and her grandmother. As the days passed, the legal team worked tirelessly, preparing documents, collecting evidence, and making sure everything was in place for the next step. But even as they worked, the pressure continued to mount. Every new piece of information seemed to confirm the worst. Victor Thompson was pulling out all the stops to make sure Mr. Caldwell would lose. The media picked up on the story, and soon, headlines began to appear. Billionaire faces legal battle and former business partner accuses tycoon of fraud. Mr. Caldwell could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him, but he refused to give up. Not when Maya was depending on him. Not when her future was on the line. One evening, as he sat with his lawyer, finalizing the strategy, he received a call from Maya's grandmother. "Mr. Caldwell, we've received another letter," she said, her voice shaking. "It's from Thompson's lawyer." Mr. Caldwell felt a pang of fear. "What does it say?" he asked. "It's a threat," she replied. "They're trying to intimidate us. They're saying that if we don't back down, they'll go public with everything." Mr. Caldwell's mind raced. He had expected this. Thompson had nothing left to lose, and now he was pulling out every dirty trick in the book. "We won't back down," Mr. Caldwell said firmly. "We'll fight until the very end." As he hung up the phone, he felt a deep resolve settle in his chest. This fight was no longer just about him. It was about Maya and her grandmother. It was about ensuring that the life they had begun to build could not be torn apart by the selfishness of one man. The next day, they took the fight to court. The battle was long, with Thompson's lawyer throwing everything they had at Mr. Caldwell, trying to tarnish his reputation and cast doubt on his every move. But Mr. Caldwell's lawyer was equally determined, pushing back with evidence, showing that Thompson's accusations were nothing more than a desperate attempt to reclaim control. In the end, the judge ruled in Mr. Caldwell's favor. Thompson's claims were dismissed, and the legal battle was over. The moment the verdict was announced, Mr. Caldwell felt the weight lift off his shoulders. The fight wasn't over. There would still be fallout to deal with, but the worst was behind them. As he stood outside the courthouse, watching the press swarm, he thought about what he had learned over the past few months. It wasn't just about wealth or power. It was about loyalty, family, and the willingness to fight for what really mattered. He walked back to his car, feeling a sense of calm that had eluded him for so long. When he arrived at the apartment, he found Maya and her grandmother waiting for him. Maya ran to him and hugged him tightly, a smile breaking across her face. "You did it," she said. "You really did it." Mr. Caldwell hugged her back, his heart full of pride. "We did it," he said, looking at her grandmother. Together, the victory in court had given Mr. Caldwell and his family a sense of relief, but the battle was far from over. Though Victor Thompson's claims had been dismissed, the damage had been done. The media frenzy, the pressure from his business world, and the lingering uncertainty all remained. Mr. Caldwell had made promises to Maya and her grandmother, but he knew that keeping those promises would require more than just winning in court. He had to rebuild trust not just with them, but with himself as well. Maya and her grandmother had always been the quiet strength in his life, and now, more than ever, they needed him to be their protector, their anchor. For the first time in a long while, Mr. Caldwell took a step back to reflect on everything he had been through. He sat on the balcony of his penthouse, looking out at the city lights stretching out before him. The view was beautiful, yet he felt strangely detached from it, like he was no longer a part of the world he had built. He thought about the days before Maya had come into his life, the loneliness, the emptiness. Then, Maya's laughter had filled his world, and her presence had become his compass, guiding him through the toughest times. As he sat in silence, he realized something profound. He had never truly understood what it meant to be part of a family until now. For all his wealth, his success, the achievements that everyone saw, he had never felt whole. But with Maya and her grandmother, he was learning what it meant to give without expecting anything in return, to show up when it mattered most, and to protect the ones you love with everything you have. The thought of that made him smile to himself. He had been blind to what truly mattered for so long, and now that he had a chance to make things right, he was determined not to let go. A few days later, Maya came to him with something in her hands, her school notebook. "I drew something for you," she said shyly, handing it to him. Mr. Caldwell opened it. and there, on the page, was a drawing of a large tree. Its roots were deep, and the branches reached far and wide, stretching out across the page. At the base of the tree, there were two smaller figures, Maya and her grandmother. "I drew us," she said softly. "The tree is like our family, and we're the roots. We're all connected." Mr. Caldwell looked at the drawing, his heart swelling with emotion. It was simple, yet it spoke volumes. "It's beautiful, Maya," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you." Maya smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "It's not just a tree," she explained. "It's us. We're growing together, and no one can take that away." Mr. Caldwell realized then that Maya had taught him something he would carry with him forever. Family wasn't just about blood or titles. It was about being there for each other when it mattered most, about supporting each other through the toughest of times, and about growing together, no matter the circumstances. The following weeks were filled with a mixture of court filings and media scrutiny, but for Mr. Caldwell, the most important work was happening at home. He continued to strengthen his bond with Maya and her grandmother, ensuring they had everything they needed while making sure Maya felt safe and supported. Slowly but surely, the family began to heal. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Maya looked up at him and said, "You know, I was scared at first. I didn't know if you'd really stay. But you did." Mr. Caldwell felt a lump in his throat. "I promised you I would, Maya," he said softly. "And I always keep my promises." Maya nodded, her face softening. "I know. I'm glad you're here." His heart swelled with pride. "I'm glad I'm here too, Maya." As the days went on, they continued to face the challenges ahead together. With Thompson's threats still looming, Mr. Caldwell had to remain vigilant, but the foundation he had built with Maya and her grandmother gave him a strength he had never known. No matter what the world threw at them, he knew they could handle it. One morning, several months after the legal battle had ended, Mr. Caldwell woke up to a feeling of peace he hadn't felt in years. The weight of the past was still there, but now, it was lighter. Maya had proven to him that true wealth wasn't measured by the things you owned, but by the people you loved and the bonds you formed. Maya and her grandmother had become his family, and that was worth more than any business deal or success he could ever achieve. As he walked into the kitchen that morning, he found Maya sitting at the table, her head bent over a book. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm. She looked up, a smile spreading across her face. "Good morning. I'm reading about trees," she said, pointing to the page. "I thought about what you said, about how we grow together. And I think trees are like us. They have roots, and they reach for the sky." Mr. Caldwell smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You're right, Maya. And just like trees, we'll continue to grow." Maya's grandmother walked into the room, holding a steaming cup of coffee. She smiled at the two of them, a peaceful look in her eyes. "You're both up early today," she said. "I thought we'd have a quiet day, just the three of us." Mr. Caldwell nodded, feeling a sense of contentment settle over him. "That sounds perfect," he said, sitting down at the table. As they shared breakfast, the weight of the past seemed to fade away, replaced by the warmth of their shared moments. Maya had taught him more about life and love than anyone ever could have, and he knew that together, they could face whatever the future held. The legal battles were behind them, but the real work, the work of love, trust, and family, was just beginning. And for the first time in his life, Mr. Caldwell was ready for it. The peace that Mr. Caldwell had fought for seemed to settle into their lives. Maya and her grandmother had found their footing in the new world they were building together, and for the first time in a long time, Mr. Caldwell found himself waking up each day with a renewed sense of purpose. His life no longer felt like a series of transactions, but instead, it felt like something deeper, more meaningful. Yet, as with any new beginning, challenges always followed. It was a Tuesday morning when Mr. Caldwell received an unexpected call from his lawyer. The voice on the other end was calm, but serious. "Mr. Caldwell, we've just received some troubling news," his lawyer said. "It seems Victor Thompson is not backing down. We were hoping the legal battle would end after the last ruling, but it appears he's escalating things again." Mr. Caldwell felt his stomach tighten. He had thought it was over, but now he understood that this wasn't going to be as simple as he had hoped. "What do you mean by escalating?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease rising within him. "He's made it clear that he's willing to take this fight public. He's threatening to bring up personal details about your life, things that could hurt your reputation. If he can't win in the courtroom, he's going to try to destroy you another way. Mr. Caldwell's heart sank as the weight of the situation settled in. This wasn't just a fight over money or assets. It was about his name, his reputation, and most importantly, the safety of Maya and her grandmother. He could already see the headlines, feel the judgment that would follow if Thompson was allowed to have his way. What do we do? Mr. Caldwell asked, his mind racing. We prepare, his lawyer replied. We need to make sure Thompson can't use this against you. We need to stay ahead of him. I suggest we start by looking at your public image, clearing up any details Thompson could use to manipulate the narrative. Mr. Caldwell felt the anger rise in him. How dare Thompson drag his family into this, especially after everything they had already been through? But he knew that anger wouldn't solve anything. He needed to focus. Get me the files, he said, his voice calm but resolute. Let's start working on this now. I'm not going to let him win. That afternoon, as Mr. Caldwell met with his lawyer and team, he couldn't shake the feeling that the past was catching up with him in a way he hadn't expected. He had worked so hard to leave his old life behind, to make amends for past mistakes, but now, Victor Thompson was forcing him to confront everything he had tried to escape. We need to be proactive, his lawyer said, pulling Mr. Caldwell out of his spiraling thoughts. We need to get ahead of Thompson's strategy and make sure we control the narrative. If we can show the world who you really are, not the man Thompson wants them to see, we can turn this around. Mr. Caldwell nodded, understanding. This wasn't just a fight for his reputation. It was a fight for the life he had promised to Maya and her grandmother. If Thompson's lies were allowed to take hold, it would undo everything. Later that evening, as Mr. Caldwell returned to his apartment, he was met by Maya and her grandmother. Maya, sensing the tension, looked up at him with concern in her eyes. What's wrong, Mr. Caldwell? She asked quietly, her voice filled with the same perceptive concern she had always had. Mr. Caldwell knelt down beside her, taking a deep breath. It's nothing to worry about, Maya, he said, forcing a smile. Just some old business stuff. Maya didn't seem convinced. It's not nothing, though, she said, her voice small but firm. You've been working really hard. I can tell something's going on. Mr. Caldwell smiled, impressed by her intuition. It's just a setback, Maya, he said gently. But don't worry. We'll handle it, just like we've handled everything else. Maya nodded slowly, still not entirely convinced, but trusting his words. Her grandmother, standing in the background, gave Mr. Caldwell a small nod of support. We'll face whatever comes, together, she said, her voice steady. Mr. Caldwell took a moment to let her words settle in. He had promised them both a better life, and now he realized that keeping that promise meant fighting even harder than he ever had before. Together, he echoed, his voice filled with determination. That night, after they had all gone to bed, Mr. Caldwell sat in his study, the weight of everything pressing on his shoulders. The legal battle was one thing, but the thought of Maya and her grandmother having to face any of it was another. He couldn't bear the idea of them being dragged through this again. The next few days were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and press conferences. Thompson's team was relentless, and the media began to pick up on the story, each new headline making things feel more real. But Mr. Caldwell's resolve only strengthened. He was no longer fighting for his own image. He was fighting for his family, for the life they had built together. And no matter how hard it got, he wouldn't back down. Maya, sensing the change in the air, began to ask more questions. Are you okay, Mr. Caldwell? She asked one evening, sitting next to him on the couch. You've been really busy. Mr. Caldwell looked at her, her concern genuine and unwavering. He had always tried to shield her from the harshness of the world, but he realized that Maya deserved the truth. It's been tough, he said, his voice soft. But we'll get through it. I won't let anything happen to you. Maya smiled, her small hand resting on his. I know, she said, her voice full of quiet strength. I believe you. In that moment, Mr. Caldwell knew that no matter what happened in the coming days, they would face it together. The past might have tried to pull them apart, but their bond was stronger than anything that could tear them down. Together, they would move forward, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The days after the legal battle with Victor Thompson had been resolved were filled with a strange sense of calm. Mr. Caldwell, Maya, and her grandmother had returned to their routine, but there was an unspoken tension in the air. The storm had passed, but the lingering effects were still felt. Mr. Caldwell found himself spending more time at home, trying to be present for Maya and her grandmother as much as possible. The media frenzy had died down, but the reality of what had happened still hung in the back of his mind. He knew that the legal victory had not erased the scars left by the ordeal. Maya, however, had been remarkably resilient. Despite the challenges she had faced over the past few months, she seemed to be thriving. She was more confident at school, her smile more frequent, and her eyes, once filled with uncertainty, now shone with a quiet determination. But there were still moments when he saw the flicker of doubt in her gaze, a reminder of everything she had been through. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Mr. Caldwell noticed Maya staring out the window. Her fork paused midair. He could tell that something was bothering her, and he had learned by now to trust his instincts. "Maya, is everything okay?" he asked, setting his fork down and giving her his full attention. She looked at him for a moment before answering, her voice soft. "I'm just thinking about my mom." Mr. Caldwell's heart tightened. He knew that Maya's mother had been a complicated part of her past, but she had never brought her up much. Maya's grandmother, too, had kept her distance from the subject, not wanting to stir up painful memories. But now, sitting at the table with her, Mr. Caldwell realized that the wounds Maya had been carrying were far deeper than he had understood. "I know it's hard, Maya," he said gently, "but if you ever want to talk about your mom, I'm here for you. You don't have to carry this alone." Maya's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away, not wanting to show any vulnerability. "I don't want to forget her," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "But I don't know how to feel about her anymore. It's like she left me, and I don't know why." Mr. Caldwell reached across the table and took her hand, his heart aching for her. "Sometimes people don't have the strength to do the right thing," he said softly. "But that doesn't mean you weren't worthy of love. You deserve all the love and care in the world, Maya." Maya didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked down at her plate, lost in her thoughts. Mr. Caldwell gave her a moment of space, but he could see that this was something she needed to confront. Her past was still haunting her, and it was time for her to start processing it. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "But whatever you need, whatever you feel, we'll face it together. You're not alone." Maya finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and a hint of hope. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly. "I think I'm ready to start talking about it." That night, after dinner, Maya's grandmother sat with them in the living room, a quiet tension in the air. She had been listening to their conversation, and Mr. Caldwell could see the sadness in her eyes. "I never wanted Maya to have to carry this burden," her grandmother said, her voice low. "But there are things in the past that I didn't know how to explain. I never wanted to break her heart more than it already was." Mr. Caldwell nodded, understanding her hesitation. Maya's grandmother had done her best to protect Maya from the truth, but the truth had a way of finding its way to the surface. It was time for all of them to face it, together. "Maya," her grandmother began, "your mom, she wasn't always the person she should have been. She loved you, but she struggled with a lot of things. Things that kept her from being the mother you needed." Maya's gaze softened as she listened, her expression open but filled with uncertainty. "But I don't want you to think that because she couldn't be there, that you were any less loved. You were always her world, Maya, and you're still my world. We've got to let go of the past so we can move forward as a family." The room fell quiet after her grandmother's words. Mr. Caldwell sat back, watching Maya as she absorbed what had just been shared. It was clear that this was a pivotal moment for her, a chance to begin healing old wounds. "I've always felt like I didn't belong, like there was a piece of me missing," Maya said, her voice small but determined. "But now, I think I understand that it's not about who's missing or who's not here. It's about the people who are here, the ones who love me." Mr. Caldwell's heart swelled with pride as he looked at her. "Exactly," he said. "And we're here, Maya. You're not alone in this. You've got a family, and that family is going to stand by you, no matter what." Maya smiled, a small but powerful smile, and for the first time in a long while, Mr. Caldwell saw the weight she had been carrying lift slightly. It wasn't gone, but it was the first step toward letting it go. The next few weeks were a period of gradual healing for Maya. She began to open up more, sharing her feelings and memories, not just with Mr. Caldwell and her grandmother, but also with her teachers and the new friends she had made at school. She started to realize that the love and support around her were more than enough to fill the spaces left behind by the past. One afternoon, as Mr. Caldwell walked Maya home from school, he asked, "How are you feeling?" She turned to him, her face bright with the first real joy he had seen in her for a long time. "I feel like I'm starting to be okay," she said, her smile wide and genuine. "I don't know if I'll ever forget, but I think I can forgive. And that's enough for now." Mr. Caldwell smiled back, his heart full of warmth. That's all anyone can ask for. They continued walking, the sound of their footsteps in sync, a silent promise between them that whatever came next, they would face it together. Maya had taken the first steps toward healing, and with the love and support of her family, she knew she would continue to grow stronger. Together, they were more than enough. And that was all that mattered. Weeks passed, and with each passing day, the bonds between Mr. Caldwell, Maya, and her grandmother grew stronger. Maya was blossoming in ways he hadn't imagined possible. Her confidence was returning, and her smile became more frequent. There were still moments of doubt, but she was learning how to navigate her feelings, and that was more than he had ever hoped for. However, just as the family began to feel like they could finally breathe again, the storm that had been brewing in the background started to rear its ugly head once more. It started with a phone call, an unexpected one, at the most inconvenient time. Mr. Caldwell was in his office, going over some routine paperwork when his phone rang. He recognized the number immediately. It was his lawyer. "Mr. Caldwell, I need you to sit down," his lawyer said, his voice sounding unusually tense. Mr. Caldwell's stomach tightened. "What happened?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "Victor Thompson is back in the picture," his lawyer replied. "He's filed a motion to reopen the case. But this time, it's not just about the money. He's bringing up personal allegations, things from your past that could tarnish your reputation and your family's name." The words hit Mr. Caldwell like a punch to the gut. He thought this was over. He had believed that with the court's ruling, they could finally put Thompson's accusations behind them. But now it seemed like Thompson was intent on making sure that Mr. Caldwell's life would never be the same. "What kind of personal allegations?" Mr. Caldwell asked, his voice calm, though his mind was racing. "He's bringing up some old business dealings, and he's insinuating that your personal life might be tied to the scandal he's alleging," the lawyer explained. "He's trying to paint you as someone with a lack of moral integrity. He's aiming to turn public opinion against you, especially in the media." Mr. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, trying to process the news. The last thing he wanted was to drag Maya and her grandmother back into the mess. They had just begun to heal, and now this new threat was looming over them, threatening to undo everything they had worked so hard for. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fury that was starting to bubble beneath the surface. "We fight back," the lawyer replied. "We go after him. We find every shred of evidence that proves his claims are false, and we make sure that he can't use this against you. We have to clear your name once and for all, Mr. Caldwell." The idea of facing off against Thompson again was daunting, but Mr. Caldwell knew he had no other choice. He had promised Maya and her grandmother that he would protect them, and that was exactly what he intended to do. He would not let Thompson tear apart the family they had started to build. That evening, as he sat with Maya and her grandmother, he realized that the weight of the world was now on his shoulders. Maya had become so much a part of his life, a source of light that had helped him rediscover his own humanity. Her grandmother had trusted him with her granddaughter's future, and he would not, let that trust be betrayed. Maya, sensing the change in the air, looked up from her homework and saw the tension in his face. "Mr. Caldwell, what's going on?" she asked, her voice gentle but perceptive. Mr. Caldwell smiled at her, trying to mask the worry in his eyes. "It's nothing, Maya," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Just some old business stuff. You don't need to worry." Maya didn't buy it. She had learned to read him too well. "It's not nothing," she said, setting her pencil down and meeting his gaze. "You've been quiet all day." Mr. Caldwell sighed, knowing she was right. He had always been the one to keep things from her, to shield her from the harsh realities of the world. But this was different. She deserved the truth, even if it scared him to say it. "Maya," he said, his voice low and serious, "there's something I need to tell you. There's someone from my past who's trying to bring up some old issues. He's trying to hurt me, to hurt us." Maya's brow furrowed in confusion. Why would someone do that? She asked. Because they want something, Mr. Caldwell replied. They want to tear me down, and in doing so, they want to hurt everyone I care about. But I won't let that happen. Maya's grandmother, who had been quietly listening from across the room, stood up and walked over to them. Maya, you're old enough now to understand that sometimes people can be cruel, but you don't have to let their cruelty define you, she said, her voice steady. What matters is what we choose to do. We stand together, and we stay strong. No matter what happens, we have each other. Mr. Caldwell looked at her, grateful for her wisdom and unwavering support. He had always admired her strength, and now, in this moment, he saw just how much he needed it. You're right, he said, nodding. We'll face this together. I promise you that. That night, after they had gone to bed, Mr. Caldwell sat by the window in his study, staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled like stars, distant and cold. The weight of the past felt unbearable at times, but he knew he couldn't turn away from it. Maya and her grandmother had given him so much. Now it was time to give everything he had to protect them, to make sure their future was safe from the shadows of his past. As he sat there, the door to the room opened softly. Maya, her hair still damp from her shower, stepped inside, holding something in her hands. I made something for you, she said quietly, holding out a small drawing. It was a picture of a tree, the roots strong and deep, the branches stretching wide. It's us, Maya said softly. We're strong, like this tree. No matter what happens, we'll be okay. Mr. Caldwell felt a lump form in his throat. He reached out and took the drawing from her. It's beautiful, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Maya. She smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile that made his heart ache with love. I know we'll be okay, she said. Because we're together. Mr. Caldwell smiled back, a sense of calm settling over him for the first time in days. Maya was right. No matter what came next, they would face it together. And with that, he knew they could conquer anything. The following weeks passed by in a blur of activity. The battle with Victor Thompson was far from over, but Mr. Caldwell was determined not to let it derail the life he had promised to Maya and her grandmother. Despite the weight of the ongoing legal struggles, he focused on keeping the peace at home. Maya was thriving in school, her smile more frequent, her confidence building every day. But beneath the surface, Mr. Caldwell knew she was still carrying the weight of her past. He could see it in the quiet moments, the way she sometimes withdrew into herself, as though the past still held a tight grip on her heart. He had promised her that they would face everything together, but as time went on, he realized that he could only do so much. She had to face her own demons. One night, after dinner, as the three of them sat in the living room, Mr. Caldwell decided it was time to have a serious conversation. He had been avoiding it for weeks, not wanting to bring up the past or make Maya relive any painful memories. But now, he knew it was the right moment. He looked across the room at Maya, who was sitting on the couch, her legs crossed beneath her. She was reading a book, but he could tell her mind was elsewhere. Her grandmother was sitting nearby, watching him carefully. Maya, he said softly, there's something I think we need to talk about. Maya looked up from her book, her expression unreadable. She could tell from his tone that this was important. What is it, Mr. Caldwell? She asked, setting the book aside. Her grandmother, too, shifted in her seat, sensing the gravity of the moment. Mr. Caldwell hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I know things haven't been easy for you, he began. And I know that a lot of the stuff with your mom is still weighing on your heart. I want you to know that it's okay to talk about it. You don't have to keep it inside. Maya's eyes flickered with a mixture of emotions, surprise, hesitation, and something deeper that Mr. Caldwell couldn't quite place. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know how to feel about her anymore. Mr. Caldwell could feel the pain in her words, and it broke his heart. He had always known that Maya's mother was a complex part of her life, but hearing her struggle to make sense of it was different. It was raw and real, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. It's okay to feel confused, Maya, he said gently. Sometimes, the people we love the most don't turn out the way we want them to, and that can hurt more than anything. Maya's grandmother nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. Your mother loved you in her own way, Maya, she said quietly. But sometimes, love isn't enough. People can't always be what we need them to be. Maya looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting nervously. I still want to remember the good things, she said after a moment, her voice trembling. I want to remember the times when she was there for me. But it's hard because she wasn't there when I needed her most. Mr. Caldwell felt a deep ache in his chest, but he knew that this was the moment Maya needed to hear the truth, not just about her mother, but about her own strength. Maya, he said softly, you're stronger than you think. It's okay to remember the good things, but it's also okay to let go of the parts that hurt. You don't need to carry that weight with you anymore. Maya's grandmother added, you've made it through so much, Maya. You've learned to stand tall, even when things were difficult. And now, it's time for you to let go of the past and move forward. You deserve a future full of happiness and peace. Maya wiped her eyes, looking up at Mr. Caldwell and her grandmother. I want to let go, she said, her voice firm now, though the tears still lingered. But it's hard. I don't want to forget, but I want to stop hurting. Mr. Caldwell nodded, understanding more than he had words for. You don't have to forget, Maya, he said. But you can choose how much it controls you. You have the power to heal, and we're all here to help you through it. There was a long silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if, for the first time in a long while, they were all on the same page. Maya wasn't alone in this journey. She had her family, and they were stronger together than they ever had been apart. The next few weeks were filled with quiet progress. Maya started talking more about her feelings, not just with Mr. Caldwell and her grandmother, but with her teachers as well. She even started seeing a counselor, someone who could help her navigate the complexity of her emotions. It wasn't easy, but the more she opened up, the more she realized that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about accepting what had happened and choosing to move forward. One evening, a few weeks later, Maya came home from school with a smile on her face. I had a good day, she said, sitting down at the kitchen table with her grandmother. Mr. Caldwell, who had been working in his office, looked up from his desk. That's great, Maya, he said, setting his papers aside. What happened? Maya looked at him, her eyes filled with a new kind of confidence. I talked about my mom today, she said, her voice steady. And I didn't cry. I think I'm ready to be okay with everything. I'm ready to move on. Mr. Caldwell felt a lump form in his throat. He had always known Maya was strong, but hearing her say those words, hearing the certainty in her voice, made him realize just how much she had grown. I'm proud of you, Maya, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're more resilient than I ever could have imagined. Maya smiled, and for the first time, Mr. Caldwell saw that smile without any trace of hesitation or doubt. She was ready to face the world, to take on whatever came next. And with her grandmother and him by her side, she knew she could handle anything. The future wasn't just something to be feared anymore. It was something she could shape on her own terms. And that was the greatest gift of all. The days following Maya's breakthrough felt like a fresh start for the entire family. There was a renewed sense of calm in the apartment, and for the first time in a long while, Mr. Caldwell could feel the weight lifting from his shoulders. The legal battle with Victor Thompson was still ongoing, but now, the true priority had shifted. Maya was healing, and with her grandmother's steady presence, she was beginning to flourish in a way that Mr. Caldwell hadn't imagined possible when they first met. Each day, he saw her becoming more of the person she was always meant to be, a young girl filled with strength, wisdom, and an open heart. Still, despite all the progress, the past wasn't completely behind them. There were nights when Mr. Caldwell found himself awake, unable to quiet the thoughts racing through his mind. He would look over at Maya, peacefully sleeping, and wonder if the world would truly let her live without the constant shadows of the past looming over her. But with every day, he saw more and more that Maya was stronger than he had ever imagined, and that she was on her own path to healing, one that he could only support, not control. One Saturday afternoon, Maya asked if they could take a trip to the park. It was a sunny day, the kind of perfect weather that made the world feel lighter, as though everything was aligned for just a few moments of peace. Mr. Caldwell agreed, happy to spend some time with her outside of their usual routines. Let's go, he said with a smile, offering her a hand. The two of them, along with Maya's grandmother, made their way to the nearby park. Maya, with her now familiar smile, raced ahead, her sneakers kicking up dust as she dashed toward the swings. Mr. Caldwell watched her, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride. She was truly a different person now, more carefree, more open to the world around her. As they walked to a nearby bench, Maya's grandmother sat down, watching her granddaughter swing higher and higher. "She's growing up fast, isn't she?" Mr. Caldwell said, taking a seat beside her. Maya's grandmother nodded, her face soft with both love and nostalgia. "Yes, but in a good way," she said quietly. "We've been through a lot, but look at her now. She's healing." Mr. Caldwell looked over at Maya, who was laughing as she soared through the air. For the first time in a while, he let himself truly take in the moment. Maya was not just surviving, she was thriving. And that was something he would do everything in his power to protect. Just as they were getting comfortable, the sound of a car pulling up caught Mr. Caldwell's attention. He turned his head to see a sleek, black sedan slowing down near the park's entrance. His stomach tightened instinctively. Even after all that had happened, the sight of that car, the kind of car driven by people in his business circle, reminded him that his life wasn't as simple as it seemed. He stood up, suddenly alert, and watched as the car came to a stop. Out stepped a familiar figure, Kenneth Brooks, the lawyer who had represented Victor Thompson. Mr. Caldwell's heart skipped a beat. Why was he here? The lawyer walked toward him with an air of quiet confidence, his eyes cold as always. When he reached Mr. Caldwell, he stopped and gave a brief nod. "Mr. Caldwell," Brooks said in a clipped voice. "We need to talk." Mr. Caldwell's heart pounded in his chest. He looked over at Maya and her grandmother, both of whom were unaware of the tension building. He knew he had to protect them, protect their peace. "Not here," Mr. Caldwell said firmly, his voice steady but filled with an edge. "Not while my family is here. We can talk later." Brooks glanced toward Maya, noting her presence, then back at Mr. Caldwell. "This can't wait," he said, his tone cold. "It's about the case. We have to resolve this before it goes any further." Mr. Caldwell felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he controlled it, taking a deep breath. "This is not the time, Kenneth," he said, his words carefully measured. "You've already tried to disrupt my life once. If you want to continue this, we'll do it on my terms. When it's just us, no distractions, no threats." Brooks hesitated, his gaze flicking back to Maya for a brief moment. Then, as if making a decision, he stepped back slightly. "Fine," he said, a trace of irritation in his voice. "We'll schedule a meeting. But don't think this is over." With that, he turned and walked back to his car, leaving Mr. Caldwell standing there, his fists clenched. At his sides, as the car pulled away, Mr. Caldwell exhaled slowly, realizing just how much he had let Thompson's presence haunt his life. The past had a way of reaching into the present, and no matter how hard he tried to shield his family from it, it always seemed to find a way to resurface. "Is everything okay?" Maya's grandmother asked, her voice filled with concern as she watched Mr. Caldwell from the bench. Mr. Caldwell looked over at her, a small, reassuring smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Everything's fine," he said. "I'll take care of it." He didn't want to bring the weight of the situation down on them. Not now. Not when things had just begun to feel stable. But he knew that this new development meant that the fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Later that evening, as Mr. Caldwell sat with Maya and her grandmother, he realized that the journey ahead wasn't just about protecting them from the world. It was about building something stronger than the world's distractions and threats. They were family, and they had made it this far together. No matter what came next, he would face it with them. And with that, Mr. Caldwell knew that he had already won the most important battle. He had shown Maya that her past didn't define her future. Together, they would face whatever came next, and no matter how difficult, they would continue to grow, together. The weeks following the confrontation with Kenneth Brooks were filled with uncertainty. The legal battle with Victor Thompson was escalating, and Mr. Caldwell could feel the weight of it growing heavier every day. He had expected the fight to be over after the court ruling, but Thompson's persistence had proven that nothing was ever truly settled in the world of business and power. Despite his best efforts to shield Maya and her grandmother, the tension in the air was palpable. Maya, ever perceptive, had noticed the change in Mr. Caldwell. She could see the way he would sometimes stare off into space, lost in thought, and she knew it had to do with the ongoing legal mess. But as much as she wanted to ask, she knew better than to push him for answers. Instead, she spent her time focusing on school and her friends, finding solace in the normal things that still brought her joy. It wasn't that Maya was ignoring what was happening around her. It was just that she had learned to compartmentalize, to hold on to the pieces of her life that made her feel grounded. One afternoon, as Maya walked home from school, she was startled by the sound of a car pulling up next to her. She turned to see a familiar figure behind the wheel, Mr. Caldwell's lawyer, Kenneth Brooks. Maya's stomach dropped. She had never liked the man. His cold demeanor and the way he always seemed to be hovering over them made her feel uneasy. "Maya," Brooks said, rolling down his window. "Your father wants to speak with Mr. Caldwell." Maya's heart skipped a beat. Her father? It had been so long since she had heard that word, and it still carried a weight that she wasn't sure how to handle. "What do you mean, my father?" she asked cautiously, her voice quiet. "Victor Thompson, your biological father," Brooks clarified. "He wants to meet with Mr. Caldwell. He's offering to settle the case, but he has conditions." Maya's pulse quickened, and she instinctively stepped back. "I don't want anything to do with him," she said, her voice trembling. Brooks raised an eyebrow. "It's not about what you want, Maya. It's about what's best for everyone. This could all be over if Mr. Caldwell agrees to Thompson's terms." Maya's heart was racing. The idea of her father, someone who had never been there for her, someone who had been nothing but a shadow in her life, suddenly coming back into the picture was overwhelming. She didn't want to see him, didn't want to hear from him. But the reality was, she couldn't ignore what was happening. "Tell him no," Maya said, her voice firm, despite the panic rising in her chest. "We don't need his help. We've made it this far without him." Brooks watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable, before nodding. "I'll relay your message," he said, before rolling up the window and driving away. Maya stood there for a moment, her mind spinning. She hadn't expected to hear her father's name again, not after all this time. It brought up so many feelings: confusion, anger, and a deep sense of abandonment. She knew that her mother's absence had shaped much of her life, but this was different. This was her father, the man who should have been there, but wasn't. And now, he was offering to step in, to fix things, as if that would somehow make up for everything he had done, or, rather, hadn't done. When she got home, Mr. Caldwell was waiting for her. He noticed her troubled expression immediately. "Maya, what happened?" he asked gently, walking over to her. She paused for a moment before speaking, the weight of the news heavy on her shoulders. "It was Brooks," she said, her voice trembling. "He came by and said my dad wants to meet with you. He wants to settle the case. But I don't want anything to do with him." Mr. Caldwell took a deep breath, understanding the gravity of what Maya had just shared. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, Maya," he said softly. "I'm here to protect you, no matter what." Maya nodded, grateful for his words, but the confusion was still there. "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why is he suddenly trying to fix things after all this time?" Mr. Caldwell paused, choosing his words carefully. "Some people think they can fix things by throwing money at them. But it doesn't work that way. A father doesn't just show up when it's convenient for him, especially after abandoning his child." Maya felt a flicker of anger rise in her chest. "I don't want him to come back into my life, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice strong. "I don't need him. You and Grandma are the only family I need." Mr. Caldwell smiled softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know, Maya," he said, his voice filled with warmth and sincerity. "You've always had everything you need with us, and nothing's going to change that." Maya felt a sense of calm wash over her at his words. She wasn't alone in this, and no matter what happened with her father, she had people who cared for her and would never let her down. That night, as she lay in bed, Maya thought about everything that had happened. Her father's sudden reappearance had shaken her, but she realized that the past didn't have to define her future. She had the power to decide who she let into her life, and who she chose to keep out. The next morning, Maya woke up feeling stronger, more resolved than ever. She knew she could face whatever challenges came her way, as long as she had Mr. Caldwell and her grandmother by her side. As the days went on, she found peace in the decision she had made to distance herself from her father. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do. She was no longer a victim of her past. She was in control of her own future. And with that strength, she knew she could take on anything that came next. Weeks passed since the unsettling visit from Kenneth Brooks, and while the looming threat of Victor Thompson's attempts to re-enter their lives was still hanging over them, Maya and her grandmother were finding their rhythm again. The peace Mr. Caldwell had promised them was beginning to settle. even as he worked tirelessly to ensure that their past would never haunt their future. Maya had become more open, her smile less guarded, and her confidence continued to blossom. For the first time in a long while, she was genuinely excited about school and making new friends. The girl who once carried the weight of an uncertain future now walked with a sense of purpose, with Mr. Caldwell and her grandmother by her side. Despite all this progress, Mr. Caldwell couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something still felt off. He could see how Maya had started to open up emotionally, but he also knew that there were still pieces of her past that she hadn't fully confronted. She was healing, yes, but the scars remained. And the longer he sat by and let things unfold, the more he realized that there was a conversation they needed to have, a conversation that could finally put her past to rest once and for all. He had been avoiding it, unsure of how to approach it, but he knew now that it was time. One evening, after a quiet dinner, he found Maya sitting in the living room, reading a book. Her grandmother was out visiting a friend, leaving the two of them alone for the first time in a while. Mr. Caldwell sat across from her, watching as she turned the pages with an absent-minded focus. He cleared his throat, gathering his thoughts. "Maya," he began, his voice soft but steady. "There's something we need to talk about." Maya looked up from her book, her brow furrowing in slight concern. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone casual, but Mr. Caldwell could hear the unease in her voice. He took a deep breath, preparing himself for the difficult conversation ahead. "It's about your mom," he said quietly. Maya stiffened at the mention of her mother's name. She had avoided talking about her for so long, keeping her memories locked away. But Mr. Caldwell knew that avoiding the subject wasn't the solution. It was time for Maya to finally face what had been holding her back. "Maya, I know it's not easy, but I think it's important to talk about her. Not to dwell on the past, but to understand how far you've come, how strong you've become." Maya's eyes flickered with emotion, but she remained silent, staring at the floor. Mr. Caldwell gave her a moment, letting her process his words. "You don't have to talk about everything, Maya, but I want you to know that it's okay to feel what you feel, to not have all the answers. It's okay to feel hurt, to feel anger, or even to feel nothing at all." He paused, searching for the right words. "Your mom, she made choices that hurt you, and that's not your fault. You were always deserving of her love, but sometimes people are too broken to give love the way they should. That doesn't change who you are. You are strong, and you are loved, Maya." Maya looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't know if I can ever forgive her," she whispered. "I want to, but I don't know how. It feels like a part of me is missing, like I'll always be broken." Mr. Caldwell's heart broke as he listened to her, knowing that this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she could finally release the burden she had been carrying. "Maya, forgiveness is not about letting someone off the hook. It's not about excusing what they did. Forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the hold the past has on you. It's about taking control of your life again, so that you're not defined by the pain someone else caused." He leaned forward, looking her directly in the eyes. "You don't have to forgive her right away, and you don't have to do it on anyone's timeline but your own. But I want you to know that you don't have to carry this weight anymore. You've been carrying it long enough." Maya was quiet for a moment, and Mr. Caldwell gave her the time she needed. She had been through so much, and he knew this was not something that could be fixed overnight. But as he sat there with her, he felt a sense of peace. This was the beginning of something important. After what felt like an eternity, Maya spoke again. "I don't want to let her go. I don't want to forget her completely, even though she hurt me." Her voice was fragile, but there was a clarity in her words that made Mr. Caldwell proud. "I understand," he said softly. "It's not about forgetting, Maya. It's about accepting that you can't change the past, but you can decide how it affects you going forward." Maya nodded slowly, still unsure, but there was a shift in her demeanor. "I think I'm ready to start letting go," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I'll ever fully understand, but maybe I can start moving forward." Mr. Caldwell smiled, proud of her strength. "That's all I can ask for," he said. "You don't have to have all the answers. You just need to know that you're not alone. We're here, and we're going to help you through this." The rest of the evening was quiet, but it was a peaceful kind of quiet, one where both of them knew that the hardest conversation had been had. Maya wasn't fully healed, but she had taken a significant step toward it. And Mr. Caldwell knew that this was just one of many steps she would take in her journey toward becoming the person she was always meant to be. As he watched her fall asleep later that night, he felt a deep sense of pride and gratitude. She had come so far, and no matter what the future held, he knew they would face it together, with strength and love guiding them every step of the way. As the days turned into weeks, Mr. Caldwell began to see a quiet transformation in Maya. She was still the same girl, but there was a new layer to her, a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. It wasn't that she had forgotten her past, but she was finally beginning to accept it, to make peace with the parts of her life that had once felt so painful. She was learning to move forward, slowly but surely. One evening, as Mr. Caldwell returned home from another busy day at work, he found Maya sitting on the couch, a journal open in front of her. She was scribbling something on the page, lost in thought. Her grandmother was sitting nearby, knitting quietly, but the air between them felt lighter, more comfortable. Mr. Caldwell smiled, watching Maya for a moment before he spoke. "How was your day?" he asked, stepping into the living room. Maya looked up, her face brightening. "It was good," she said. "We did a project on trees in science class. It made me think about that drawing I gave you, the one of the tree." Mr. Caldwell's heart warmed at the mention of the drawing. It had become a symbol of their journey, a reminder of how far Maya had come. "I remember," he said, sitting down beside her. "You said the tree was like our family." Maya nodded, a thoughtful look crossing her face. "Yeah," she said. "It's like the roots keep us grounded, and the branches reach for something bigger, something better. I think that's what we're doing, reaching for something better, even if it's hard sometimes." Mr. Caldwell's smile widened, his heart swelling with pride. "That's a beautiful way to think about it," he said softly. "You're right. We're all growing, together." Maya looked down at her journal for a moment, then back up at Mr. Caldwell. "I've been writing about my mom," she said hesitantly. "I don't know if I'm ready to share it with you, but it helps me to write it down." Mr. Caldwell's heart tightened at the mention of Maya's mother. He had known that this was part of Maya's healing process, but hearing her speak about it openly, without fear or shame, made him realize just how far she had come. "Maya," he said, his voice gentle, "you don't have to share anything you're not ready to, but I'm proud of you for writing it down. Sometimes, writing can be the first step to understanding." Maya smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It helps," she said quietly. "I don't have to carry it all inside anymore." Mr. Caldwell nodded, understanding. He knew that Maya had been carrying a lot, more than any child should have to bear. But now, she was finding her way through the darkness. She was learning to release the things that had held her back, and with each day, she was growing stronger. As the evening went on, Mr. Caldwell, Maya, and her grandmother sat together, talking about their plans for the future. Maya spoke with a new sense of purpose, talking about the things she wanted to do, the places she wanted to go. Mr. Caldwell listened intently, his heart swelling with pride. It was a small, quiet moment, but it was one of the most meaningful moments he had experienced in a long time. This was what he had been fighting for all along. This was the future he had promised to Maya, the future she deserved. After they had finished talking, Mr. Caldwell retired to his study, his mind still racing with everything that had transpired. The legal battles had been difficult, and there was still much work to do to protect Maya and her grandmother from the remnants of the past, but he knew that they had come a long way. The future was still uncertain, but he was no longer afraid of it. He had learned something profound over the past few months. Family wasn't just about blood or shared history. It was about the people who choose to stand by you, no matter what. And in that moment, he knew that the bond he shared with Maya and her grandmother was stronger than anything that could come from the outside world. He had once thought that he had to do everything alone, that his success was something he had to achieve by himself. But Maya had shown him that the real measure of success wasn't in the wealth he had built or the reputation he had created. It was in the relationships he nurtured, the love he gave, and the family he had chosen. That night, as he prepared for bed, Mr. Caldwell glanced at the family photo on his nightstand, the one of him, Maya, and her grandmother, taken during a rare moment of laughter at the park. It was a picture that captured not just their faces, but the essence of who they had become. They had been through so much, and yet, they had made it through together. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, Mr. Caldwell felt hopeful. He knew that no matter what challenges they would face in the future, they would face them as a family. And together, they could overcome anything. As he lay down, he closed his eyes, thinking of the future that was unfolding before them. A future filled with growth, with love, and with the certainty that they would always have each other. That was the greatest gift he could give to Maya, a future where she would never have to feel alone again. Months passed, and the clouds that had once loomed so large over their lives began to clear. The legal battles with Victor Thompson had been drawn out and intense, but with each passing day, Mr. Caldwell felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. The court's final ruling had been in their favor, and with it, the lingering threat of Thompson's attempts to destroy his reputation was finally over. But for Mr. Caldwell, the victory wasn't just about the legal outcome. It was about the quiet strength he had discovered in himself, the bonds he had forged with Maya and her grandmother, and the realization that the true value of his life wasn't in the power or wealth he had once chased. It was in the people he loved. Maya, now more confident than ever, had been excelling in school. She was laughing more, living more freely, and although she still carried the scars of her past, she was no longer defined by them. She had blossomed into a young woman who was in control of her own future. Her grandmother, too, had found peace. Her days were spent with purpose, caring for Maya and helping her navigate the world in a way that was steady and grounded. The bond between the three of them had grown deeper over time. Every challenge they faced only made them stronger. One sunny afternoon, after school, Maya came running into the apartment with a big smile on her face. "Guess what?" she exclaimed, barely able to contain her excitement. Mr. Caldwell looked up from his work and raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" he asked, his tone amused by her energy. "I got accepted to the summer art program," she said, bouncing on her feet. "I've been wanting to do it for so long, and now I finally get the chance." Mr. Caldwell's heart swelled with pride. Maya had always had a talent for art, and this program was a dream come true for her. "That's fantastic, Maya," he said, standing up to give her a hug. "You've earned it. I'm so proud of you." Maya beamed, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. She was no longer the girl weighed down by her past. She was a young woman looking ahead, with hope and excitement for the future. Her grandmother joined them in the living room, a smile on her face as she watched the two of them. "I knew this day would come," she said softly. "Maya, you've always had this strength in you, even when you didn't know it." Maya smiled at her grandmother, her heart full. "Thank you for always being there for me," she said, her voice full of emotion. "I don't know where I'd be without you." "You're stronger than you think," her grandmother replied, her voice steady. "You always have been." As the days went by, Maya immersed herself in her art. She found solace in it, a way to express the emotions she had once bottled up. Her talent blossomed, and she began to share her work with others. The summer program was just the beginning, but it was a turning point. It was a clear sign that Maya had found her path, and she was ready to follow it. One evening, as the family sat together for dinner, Mr. Caldwell looked around the table, taking in the peacefulness that surrounded them. There were no lingering fears, no shadows hanging over them. This was what he had fought for, a life filled with love, security, and the promise of a future where Maya could thrive. "You know," Mr. Caldwell said as he looked at Maya and her grandmother, "I never imagined I'd be here. Not like this. When I first met you two, everything was uncertain. But now, I feel like I've found what truly matters." Maya looked up at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "I think we've all found it," she said, her voice steady. "It's not about the past or what we've lost. It's about what we have now and what we're going to build." Her grandmother smiled, her eyes soft with pride. "That's right, Maya. We've built something together, and it's strong. It will keep us grounded, no matter what comes next." Mr. Caldwell nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. He had faced countless challenges in his life, but none had taught him as much as his journey with Maya and her grandmother. They had shown him that true strength came not from wealth or success, but from love, from resilience, and from the willingness to face life's obstacles together. That evening, as the three of them sat together, talking about their hopes for the future, Mr. Caldwell felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had once thought that success was measured by what you could achieve alone, but now he understood that the greatest accomplishments were the ones you achieved together as a family. In the days that followed, Mr. Caldwell made sure to support Maya's dreams, to encourage her to pursue her passions without fear of failure. He helped her explore new opportunities, guiding her with the same love and care he had always shown. But he also made sure to give her the space to grow on her own, to make her own decisions, and to follow her own path. And with each step, he knew that she would continue to flourish. As the summer art program came to an end, Maya's confidence had blossomed even further. She had made new friends, discovered new techniques, and most importantly, she had learned that her past did not define her. She was not the girl who had been abandoned or neglected. She was a young woman with dreams and the strength to pursue them. On the day of her art show, as she stood in front of her paintings, surrounded by her new friends and family, Mr. Caldwell felt a deep sense of pride. Maya had found her voice, and it was stronger than anything he could have ever imagined. The journey they had been on together was far from over, but it was clear that they were ready for whatever the future held. Together, they had faced their struggles, found healing, and built a future that was bright with possibility. And for Mr. Caldwell, that was all he needed to know. He had given Maya the one thing she had always needed, a family who loved her, believed in her, and would always be there for her. And in that moment, as Maya's smile lit up the room, he realized that they had created something more than just a home. They had created a life that was full of hope, love, and the promise of an unbreakable bond.